to Planet Poet Words in Space. I'm your host, Sharon Israel, and my guest today is award-winning poet Sam Truitt. Hi, Sam.
Hi, Sharon.
I'm going to be reading your bio.
Indubitable pleasure to be in your company.
Thank you so much. I'm going to read Sam's bio. Sam Truitt was born in Washington, D.C., and raised there and in Tokyo, Japan. He is the author of the 10 works in the Vertical Elegies series, among others in print and other media, including most recently TOKYOATOTO and the forthcoming State Shaft, Shaft State. Among other recognitions, he is the recipient of numerous Fund for Poetry Awards, a Contemporary Poetry Award from the University of Georgia, and a Howard Fellowship. He is also the maker of numerous works in mixed media, including the aforementioned State Shaft, Shaft State, and other series like DICTE and numerous works in intermedia with musicians and filmmakers. Sam Truitt earned a PhD in English from the University at Albany and an MFA in Creative Arts from Brown University. The director of Station Hill Press and president of the Institute for Publishing Arts, including, among other projects, the podcast Baffling Combustions and the Station Hill Intermedia Project. He lives in Woodstock, New York, where he is the co-founder of the nonprofit Woodstock Center for Awakening, which will host the second Woodstock Community Festival of Awakening in August, and is a volunteer ambulance driver for the Woodstock Rescue Squad. Let's talk about TOKYOATOTO, Sam, and if you introduce that, it's part of the as well as the Vertical Elegies series for us before you start reading.
Well, TOKYOATOTO emerges out of an opportunity that I had in 2019 to go to Tokyo. In part, it alighted with a show of works on paper that my mother made when we were in Tokyo. So there was a show in Roppongi in Tokyo. So ostensibly there was a rationale, kind of a target, go to the show. This was a series of sumo drawings that my mom did. And at the same time, it's been, it was about 54 years since I had been in Japan. I was there when I was 3 years old till almost 7. Japanese was very close to my first language. And it was really my first effective language in the world, outside of the family. And then Tokyo and parts around there were part of my earliest years, that moment at which one begins to turn outwardly in a more dynamic way. So I was incredibly interested in going back and doing a kind of personal excavation. At the same time, I was interested in the sound of Japanese and how that might inflect, myself. So I began this book in Brooklyn on the subway and, going on to the train to the plane. And then it ends just the night before I leave Tokyo. And I hand wrote this book. And the circumstance of the book itself are that the original pages are printed with the transcription of that page on verso pages. And it begins with the handwritten pages on the left-hand side. And then at an apocryphal moment, it switches over. And so I wanted to show where the work came from, which was the rationale in printing the original pages. And also that's one of my ambitions in this practice of poesis, which I undertook plus or minus 40 years ago. In terms of the commonality of poetry and the commonality of poetic diction, I wanted to show people that anybody can do this. Um, and also, sort of following Charles Olson, I wanted to show where it came from.
Thank you, Sam. So, as an adult, you decided to revisit your childhood experiences by going to Tokyo, or it was just on the spectrum of what you were doing?
Well, I kind of wanted to go and see what happens.
Hmm.
I think a lot of our lives is that kind of intention of doing something, and we don't know what the results of our actions might be. Yeah, so I revisited Wakamatsucho and, which is the neighborhood where we grew up, to see what befell the house in which we had lived. And it led me to the realization, a little bit like Robert Penn Warren, you can't go home again, but also to the insight that if you want to know where you came from, all you have to do is turn around.
Ooh, that's beautiful. Sam, would you read um, from TOKYOATOTO for us?
Sure. Now, you had indicated, is there, do you want me to start at the beginning?
You could, yeah, page 2 if you'd like, but whatever you'd like to read is fine.
All right. So this is from the start. There's an ad, almost square, framed in chrome, covered by plastic sheet, beat to hell in the open, on a corrugated wall, of an open mouth, of teeth and upper gums, almost perfect, and you can see the darker pink tongue stilly cleft at its axis as it is open. Lips, I sense lipstick or gloss, a bit of nose and nostrils above the gate of the teeth. On the boulevard, a cop car, its cherries and berries flashing, I see through a tight mesh grate on a platform, hook right down a residential street, and all the cars passing, pausing, or parked, tagged with dazzling patches of sunlight reflected off hoods and roofs, and I am in one in my great window, fingers in the mesh, holding on, wondering why keep going, clawing by bus and train and plane, let alone hands toward Tokyo by way of Peking, hoping I may cop the day pass to walk the periphery of T Square as though circa half a world away, some existential exegetical geometry by which to fit into a conspiracy of ads, when what we really need are minuses, less, sticking straight up through not a wall as what spills through them, fingers, flesh, white flesh against steel mesh, or out the mouth of the security snake put in place to strangle what I have just passed through, shaken, as even as I carry no contraband or record or exposure. I swear I am at heart a criminal, and so watch my step and follow the rule to not become a problem, and help people as I am able to get through the wall, or maybe me too keep taking away thought by thought, grooving to the terminal countdown, ethno-acoustico atmospheros hum, all below the muzak, what colleagues, friends, and family form. These knots, these hills and hillocks that are probably mountains of sound shapes that seems to correspond to those through whom they speak what speaks them, with the sun out the slated wall of glass behind me at the bar, low in the sky, across the tarmacs and the fins and tails of planes, the air like the dirty martini the bartender is pouring. And it's sad to report those of us alone with all are all enscreened, untalking, scrolling, or tapping, swiping, staring into cell phones in a Borgesian leap in some escape, just like I'm on this page.
Thank you, Sam. That's Sam Truitt reading from his book TOKYOATOTO. It's fascinating because you described how one page is printed and one page is and the facing page is your notes. But also there's a third dimension when you read it out loud. It changes and you can go from one page to the next and it adds a whole other dimension.
Well, understanding that, this is literally just a transcription of what's happening at that interval between what I am and the character of this surface that I'm passing through. So the page is a natural constraint. So they're not individual pages. It's all of a stream.
Hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
I want you to read from one of the comments in the back of your book by Joanne Drucker. She says the intimacy of writing as note taking feels palpably present. We intrude on those personal pages, even in facsimile. By contrast, the public facing presentation of the typeset texts feels bold, exposed, declaratively blunt in its directness. Can you tell us more about that? Do you agree with that?
Well, it's very kind of Joanna to write in that way. It is difficult for me to respond to what she's writing because her experience as a reader is very different from mine as a writer. That I remember my teacher, Peter Gizzi, uh, speaking of the difference between Fred Astaire dancing and we watching Fred Astaire. For
Mm,
Fred Astaire, it's a very,
yes.
very different.
It helped me, and I find the work very touching, and it does what a poem does. It puts me in a different place and an experiential place. And you have written, when we talked before the show, conversation and speech is inherently poetic. You can write out of an immediate situation, so you have both. And I know that you had told me that you studied medieval literature and history, I believe, early on. And I was wondering if this had any influence, your study of medievalism, any influence on TOKYOATOTO. I found that in a way the handwritten page illuminates the printed words, or vice versa.
Mm.
'Cause-
Yeah, definitely on that score, the carrying over of the original pages into its print dimension and, also a little bit perhaps egotistically, I also wanted to show that I didn't change it that much. In other words, what I did in the notebook, I transcribed virtually, on the verso page. I think for me, and what sort of echoes a little bit what Joanne writes, is the interest of being on the line is that like a basketball player, shooting a foul shot, you're on the line. And I'm interested in getting to that point at which the words emerge out of something into something, that moment of transition or appearance, of originality, of natus, the derivation of the word nature, means to be born. It's a past participle, natus, and the idea of getting to the parabola of creation, getting to that moment of making. Um, and so, yeah, definitely sort of like, as we discussed, actually, Kedman's hymn, this is transmitted through the ecclesiastical history of England by the Venerable Bede, speaks of this plowsman who hung around in the monastery and began to pick up the structures of alliterative verse. And as a illiterate plowsman, he said, "Oh, well, I can do that. I can do that." And then he did that, and then would recite to, yeah, as I recall, Nushulon herion heofon reches verid, methode michte and as modio thonk, werk wulde fader swahe wandres jewas, etche driftan ora stelda. You know,
Oh,
so
that's
these
wonderful.
this is, yeah, that's Kedman. And so
Cadman.
I'm very interested in that. And this was far more significantly taken up in my works of extemporaneous or spontaneous diction, of using a tape machine, of using a microphone to compose poetry on the spot around New York City. And for example, this book, State Shaft State, is very much in that line. And what I found is that you can speak poetry. It takes a little bit of what we call attenciones, but a little bit of kind of practice, so you get used to listening to the distortion of yourself
Mm.
through hearing your own voice is kind of creepy. But then once you've gotten through that, it is actually possible to write poetry, just speaking poetry. And it really underscores for me a line of English poetry that was present in Chaucer, that was present certainly in Wordsworth, but the whole idea of that human speech is inherently poetic.
Hmm. Conversation and speech, yes. I originally titled this show for podcast Sam Truitt and the Poetic State, and you said, no, let's call it Sam Truitt and the Poetic Continuum, which is much better, is more in keeping with what you do and what you say about your work. I want to play a piece for everybody. It's from Ozone Poetics, and I'm just going to play it, and then Sam, you'll tell us about it.
Aye, aye.
Okay.
Ozone Poetics. How to fold what's happening into rhyme, how to fold rhyme into what is happening. The two kiss yet never lock. The organization of the visual surface to the void around the vanishing point. The syntagma. Except ahead, the pervasive fold, asymptote, invisible, except song.
That's Sam, the voice of Sam Truitt. And there's a beautiful video section of that also, a component to that also. So, Sam, could you tell us a little bit about that work?
Well, that work comes out of, I went to Cuba in 2016, 17, traveled on Christmas, so just at the cusp. And there, I went with my family and another family whom we were traveling with. And I had on that visit the occasion to meet the poet Omar Perez. And so I went to Cuba, I'm writing, doing the normal thing. And then, meeting Omar was a catalytic event for me, to the extent that I felt such an affinity for him and his center of, you could call it balance, his pivot, his, I think I used in Kedman, I used that word modiothunk, his world thought. And so that occasioned another visit to Cuba to spend time with Omar. And that also occasioned our writing a grant to get him out of Cuba, which was a big hassle. But nevertheless, this was in the Obama times. And so going into the Trumpy times, but we were able to bring him here. And so this is part of a long continuum of exchange that I have with Omar. What I did with that poem, which I wrote in this in this period of time of working in out of the Cuban instigation and Omar's instigation, which is a book called Os, O-S. Uh, I took I took the work, the writing, and we did a performance of it at Greenkill. And this was a sort of an intermedia performance in which we used the visual material from the director Elia's Memories of Underdevelopment, which was a post-revolution film in and around Havana, super interesting black and white film, and then worked with Gary Siegel to do sound. And then that was part of the sound of that background that we performed into. So that's what that was.
Yeah, the
um,
repetition and the echoing of your voice, there was a real shimmer to that.
yeah,
Did you develop that with your co-creators, or was that your idea?
yeah, my idea of the echo perhaps could be picked up from Simon Pettit, uh, who is fond of reading a poem and then reading the same poem again.
Uh-huh.
The understanding that some things stand repeating, but also I'm interested in that interval between hearing something and then knowing what is to come, and that fold between its first thing and its second is a place in which we can locate something that's a little bit deeper inside and also outside of the sound field that we were creating, and to experiment with that.
Hmm. It's sort of the liminal space between the first sound and the second sound, and that's it. It's a tiny bit of silence, but it has that real feeling of flow to it, Sam.
Yeah. And I think with poetry, there's oftentimes a desire to suppress meaning. So if one already knows what's to come, then there's a moment of the cessation, temporary cessation of the analytical mind.
Oh yes.
Um, I think it's a little bit analogous to a thief who wants to enter a house, and there's a dog that's guarding the house. So you get a nice piece of meat and you throw it to the dog.
That's good to distract the dog. So you distract your intellect. I agree. I think that when you talk about the poetic continuum is also that suspension of of analytics and meaning. It's a different meaning of meaning. It's not so linear. And I find for myself writing and for reading poetry and for listening, it's that experiential thing. It's the space that's created as a mini world. I find this your work does that. It sort of takes you out of the normal sequential logical world into,
Mm.
dare I say, the poetic continuum. And
Yeah, dig it. I mean, for me, meaning, it's derived from the Proto-Indo-European me. We get measure, method, modio, thomo. The whole idea of medium is in the middle.
mhm,
Medium is something that exists in the middle. It is a line between two things that allows one to derive a message from that which is
Mm-hmm.
between. So that meaning is in that space of the echo, perhaps, that is the middle.
Yes.
Yeah. So, yeah, we want to get to meaning without meaning. We want to
Right.
get to that, because I mean, meaning, being in the middle means that one is still between two things, one is still in a condition, say, of duality.
Right.
Yeah. And so it seems to me poetry and broadly speaking, art, as we've come to understand it, is that reach beyond beyond our duality toward a non-dual state.
Thank you, Sam.
Yeah, it can't be put into words. That's of course,
That's
the
the
irony.
point. That's the point, right?
Yeah, I
In a
mean,
way,
there's
we're
a
using,
sneaky,
yeah, using the words as a vehicle for something beyond it. But
yeah, yeah. I mean, I could go on and on.
I
The
know.
truth is
Me
that,
too.
all that artists do is put a frame around what is and say, look at this.
Mhm. You're listening to Planet Poet Words in Space on WIOX Community Radio, live and local in the Catskills. I'm your host, Sharon Israel, here with my guest, award winning poet Sam Truitt. And Sam, we're going to be discussing another piece of yours, if that's the right word, called Landfall. And would you like me to play a couple of the segments of the piece before you introduce it, or would you like to say a few words before I play?
Oh, let's go right at it.
Okay. So here is 3 separate segments of Sam Truitt's Landfall, which is also a video with sound.
The doors and stairs, they are all the same. All the same, they're side to side. In reverse, port to starboard. And it's only letters and numbers in the end. The end to guide you through it like the cabinet of Dr. Caligari. And mouth in what it does not eat to carve to help by skimming the senses with the fires of psyche. The fires of psyche dreaming ahead a body to remove its cloak in the Atlantic. Only a smidge of which we know. Fiery second taste between earth and sky. Between earth and sky, her eyes on mine. Through sliding door, rolling off her couch bed catching my eye, letting me see her eyes and body and the boat thumping through waves, unceasing vibration, signaling to eternity and ocean. Time comes draped in waves, unceasing.
That's great. So,
I know.
Sam, how do you introduce that piece to us? Would you consider that a performance piece?
Assuredly, yeah, purely performance piece. But I would fall under what I would call intermedia.
Yes.
It's part of the Station Hill Intermedia Project, and that was with Stephen Lewis on guitar, among
Mhm.
other instruments, and Mike Ratty, the rock and roll drummer
Yeah.
par excellence. With
Really,
many
really.
amazing my and then the video was made by Richard Kroling, who is a filmmaker, a total standout, great experience for me to be able to read into the space of like hard driving rock and roll. And the text for that was derived also from a Caribbean excursion that my wife and, we had these two kids. They were 8 and 10 years old. And, it was, it's a handful raising kids. And so we took a 10-day like thing down to a cruise ship. Yeah, I don't think I'll
Right.
ever do that again. But under the
When was this?
circumstances,
When was this, Sam?
geez, I'm thinking it was 2015.
Okay, that's pretty
Yeah,
recent.
yeah. And so again, this is a situation in which, you're on a ship, and then I just started writing, spending a lot of time out on, we had like a little porch, and I would just
Mhm.
watch the ocean and then watch the ship and then watch myself and watch, it was great. Yeah. And that was an interesting trip to the extent that, I framed it to the point at which we went to St. Martin. That was the farthest
Uh-huh.
south that we came. And then I wound up on this cove, and then lying down in a sea grape tree. And for me, that was the real landfall.
Mm.
That was the point at which I arrived, and then the rest was going back to New York City.
Yeah, I looked up landfall, the wiki definition. Landfall is the event of a storm moving over land after being over water. And more broadly, and in relation to human travel, it refers to the first land that is reached or seen at the end of a journey. There's a stormy side to this. It's not like clear sailing all the way. How did you come about getting your collaborators with this?
Hmm.
Did you,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So landfall for me, I think it's super interesting. I hadn't connected it with a storm event, although that just adds to it and is wonderful. I'd more seen it as sort of that point of land, of coming on land, on a journey. But at the same time, as it happens, my mother has a sculpture that she gave me called Landfall.
oh,
So that also
hmm.
has a deep resonance for me. Yeah. And as it happens, I met Stephen Lewis, who was down in Washington where I grew up. And his father and my mother knew each other. And so I knew about Stephen. And then I met him coincidentally at Greenkill. He was doing some sound work there. And
That's
based
green,
on
green
sort of a
killed. Yeah.
common past, yeah, based on a common past and so forth. And then I saw that he was a super competent, rock guitar player, and
Hmm,
he's
hmm.
the one who brought Mike Ratty and Richard Curling. I know through kind of the Hudson Valley and through my collaborations with different people here. Paul Smart, I believe, introduced me to Richard, and then also Kenneth Wapner, who's I do projects with.
Is David Shell involved in this too?
David Shell is Greenkill.
Yes, I
David
know. Green,
Shell
Green
is,
Kill Gallery. He's amazing.
yeah, assuredly, yeah. And David and I, are definitely very deep in these parts for doing all the intermedia. And I cannot speak of Greenkill without also mentioning my co-curator in that series, the poet Michael Ruby.
The lighting, the change of light and color in the video. Later on you'll let everybody know if they want to see it, where they can see landfall is quite striking. And so did you do this extemporaneously when you were reading and the musicians were improvising and the lighting was being improvised at the time?
We had two kind of rehearsals. Mike came up from northern New Jersey, and we spent some hours at Greenkill kind of, doing different possibilities. And ostensibly, they had certain riffs that they established, and then they extemporaneously performed, and I
Amazing.
extemporaneously, read with a
Hmm.
little bit of kind of edge of song.
Oh, yes. And
So,
the timing was quite amazing. It was
yeah,
very intuitive. I want to play a couple of more
all
parts of landfall. And we do that right now.
great.
Relative to the suck, aka vacuum, aka rhythm, we sense yawn at the heart of what we may get to the other side of what we know is a rubber room to know a whirl of, like Ishmael. If we are steady with Bushido blade, plumb, level to the eye, down the center of our axes to where the wobble wends through the rubble to be truly and completely and wholly amid things under the sun ray to know we get this brief glimpse. Equanimity of our simple fitting on in air this water and fire in the belly, sky's most intimately tender space. Because we never did let go the blue balloon and borne ahead plow through 8+ foot rolls in off the beam under lowering sky and felt that all ourselves are on call to the staggeringness of the scale, undimmed by circular blindness, each moment as soul rhyme of gleam to reach our hands around the fruit. Even if it is that past awareness.
That just stops too soon.
I
That's
know, I
Sam.
gotta tell you, hearing it again, it does not disappoint.
No, you
Yeah.
read with such passion, and you have a, a profound educational background, but it's like you know, you go into the passion and the emotion of that, and that beautiful line, dee, 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 that I don't know if he just came up with that, but it worked very beautifully. When you talk about the center of our axis through the rubble to be completely and wholly amid things, it really carries you sort of like a boat. It's oceanic. It moves. So you have landfall, but this piece moves.
Mm,
Um, just
thank you.
saying, just saying, Sam. Very lovely. Sam, you have a couple of poems to read that we from your current project, which I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, is a very extensive book that you're involved with. And I was wondering if you would read two poems from that if we have time. I think we do.
Yeah, this is the book Os, and yeah, it's hundreds of pages, maybe as much as 300 pages. So,
Amazing.
yeah, it's a lot. Yeah, it's a lot to face.
To face.
So which one do you want me to read?
How about starting with trembling leaves at edge of no darkness, a last sign.
So this is titled Trembling Leaves at Edge of No Darkness, a Last Sign. Unlock like the last bull dance on Earth in the first on Mars. that as we go down for yet another dip into the darkness, now too blatantly obvious to lament, in fact, embarrassment that I should dance at its attendance, knowledge and rhythm constitute the grace and the fatum. Madman living on booze and smoke and pills and love at each elbow, the stage set of which was designed by Klaus. Its first fragments appear in Die Fackel. Time that truly matters can never be made to appear. The black trunks of trees and dark wall open down cliff, a face the lights of no harbor shine on what composes walls around a navel choked with trash. The simplicity of being is buried under I am.
It's Sam Truitt reading his poem, Trembling Leaves at Edge of No Darkness, A Last Sign. And even you can read the title of the poem in many different ways. And again, it's the experience of reading the poem out loud also and seeing it on the page that shifts equilibrium a little bit. You mentioned who I had to look up certain things, and I found out that Karl Klaus was a major theatrical and writing person in Germany, and he had this a magazine that he journal or magazine called The Torch, Die Fackel. Why did you put him in there? Could you tell us, Sam?
Yeah, Karl Kraus, he wrote a book called The Last Days of Mankind
Mm.
that he
Uh-huh.
said could only be performed on the planet Mars. So that's that.
That's great. So that's maybe the first line, and unlock like the last bull dance on Earth in the first on Mars. Is that sounds like a tribute to him also. I was thinking of the
Assuredly.
yeah, I was thinking of the bull dance, perhaps the Minotaur in the labyrinth.
Well,
And
the notion of the labyrinth, uh, one line which has carried over through me, and I believe it may have a resonance with the Argentinian writer Borges,
mhm.
maps, mirrors, and labyrinths. Yeah, the
Haha.
you know,
And you quote the simplicity of being is buried under, and you say I am. Are those found words? Are those quotes from yourself or other writers?
yeah. I mean, when I entered into this Cuban Omarian conundrum, which is the basis for any continuum, is a conundrum.
Hmm.
You know,
Hmm.
the
Yeah.
I fetched around into Cuban literature, and the translator Kristen Dijkstra, who's Omar's translator, Omar Perez's
Hmm.
translator, was very, very generous and sent me her books of translation in Cuban literature, which included, for example, Reina Maria Rodriguez, I think, yeah, but
Yeah.
also uh, others. One book that played a significant role in kind of giving me coordinates that I could map was Jamie Rodriguez Matos's The Poetics of the Formless, which is
Hmm.
a study of Lezama Lima's, a Cuban critic and novelist, literary figure, um, thinker. So I owe a lot to Dr. Matos and his Poetics of the
Hmm.
Formless. Yeah.
I love that
Um,
poetics of the formless. Could you talk about form and formlessness in your briefly in your own writing?
yeah, sure. I read an essay 20 some years ago by a guy named Paul de Man, who, was a French theoretician and actually sympathetic to the Vichy government and kind of somewhat personally reprehensible guy. But he wrote a terrific essay about the nature of language and that, citing Nietzsche, that whenever we speak, the words that come out of our mouths to another person and we're saying something and da 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 da, that in everything we say, there's an implicit wink, there's an implicit irony, because we know that these words, they're makeshift, they're a symbolic system that points toward what we mean to say and what we mean, but that are not the thing itself. We can say tree, but it's not a tree, etc. So we're constantly approaching reality, but we never quite get there in that measure. So for me, this work that I'm doing now has a distinct form. It has a 3-inch length. So I fixed something like a newspaper column so that I no longer had to deal with where does the line end? Where does the line begin? That all seems to me kind of a little bit done. That because we have these mediums for audio recording, um, this and that, all of those kinds of decisions seem kind of matter of fact, seem after the fact, and seem to draw one away from, again, what I'm interested in is the event horizon. Um, yeah. And so, I just have a fixed margin. And that actually allows for a secondary or a centripetal avenue of generating meaningfulness because of the isolation of certain phrases and stuff. So, yeah, I kind of gave the whole form thing a haircut. Um, yeah, which I think it works out well on the page. And so that's the form in essence, with, as you pointed out, line repetition, which is a trope that I've used. And as you picked up on that echo thing, it's a significant attribute of my first big book, Anamorphosis Eisenhower. There you go.
Thank you, Sam.
Yeah.
Thank you. Before we go out with another poem, I think our listeners would love to know more about what you do with Station Hill Press, etc., and talk a tiny bit about your podcast and where the listener can go, where we can go to get more information about you and your work.
Yeah. I mean, Station Hill was started in 1976 by George and Susan Quasha when they moved up here from New York, stationhill.org. And, George and Susan had a deep file into Asian medicine and philosophy. We publish works in body work and things like that. But also at the same time, introduced Maurice Blanchot to the US market, very strong lean into surrealism and European things. But principally, the interest of George and Susan was publishing American poetry, American experimental poetry coming out of the aforementioned Charles Olson and his acolytes. Um, yeah. And so that's kind of Station Hill. And so we publish contemporary experimental poetry. Um, we have books coming out with Matthew Cooperman. He's in Colorado. And also John Godfrey's Prettier Grit. John Godfrey, the great New York poet. So those are some happy things coming out. And also, we're publishing a book by the aforementioned Michael Ruby, close your eyes, comma, visions. Highly experimental. So, we keep publishing. Then, a codicil of that, we have a not-for-profit, the Institute for Publishing Arts, and under that organization, we do the Station Hill Intermedia Project. Now, all of that stuff's on YouTube. So if you want to hear Landfall, just put Landfall Truitt and it'll pop up. It's about 58 minutes long. It's all
It's
good.
great. It is.
And then in terms of my own work, I'm a little disorganized in terms of sort of the online presence, but you could go to samtsong.com or samtruitt.com. And I have some stuff there. It's all over the place.
So we are going to wrap up with you reading another poem, if you would, Sam.
Absolutely.
And this one is dedicated to Reina Maria Rodriguez, who you mentioned before.
Oh, yeah. And I think I cite her other letters to Milena. That is a reference to Franz Kafka, his letters to Milena. And so she has a daughter. And so these letters are sort of to her daughter, Milena. But it's also indicative of Havana historically being a crossroads. It was the avenue to South America, to Central America, to the
Right.
Caribbean, etc. So all these French, European, African, significantly, all these influences can converge on Havana. Anyway, so that's Reina Maria. Okay, so I'll read this
Thank you.
poem entitled Lines Written Along a Crack in the Wall of This Atrium. Relative to a life of crime, hiding out in the woods manufacturing rhyme, the space to breathe your body back into space is the form. In the bag half the time, wrestling for a way to get out. At the edge of the wave's word range, I ventilate, as though I ever might. Because I wove the sack, I am the words of not. And at the outset, also, the edge of the ocean, the moon, the page open on the clouds alone we sing, pressed together to plant here an image of oblivion between us. A word gap crossing a cobblestone courtyard in Havana we sing, looking into other letters to Milena, and every stone alike a life we dream I've seen over and over, swirling in branches, repeating this realm après dance, things hidden behind the full moon of the zero. God knows down a dark road irrelevance goes to die, to come to, the code lies, imprisoned. A poem belongs to interminable silences.
That's Sam Truitt reading his poem, Lines Written Along a Crack in the Wall of This Atrium. It's been such a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for agreeing to appear and your beautiful work.
You got it, Sharon. The only thing left is to be it.
To be it. Thank you, Sam, and thank you very much for listening.
Great opportunity. Thanks so much, Sharon. You're the best.
Oh, thank you.